Reflect now on parts of South Africa's history that aren't often told. The discovery of a stone settlement, Kweneng, on the outskirts of Gauteng is one such example. Wits University archaeologists have given us a glance into what the wealthy city in Suikerbosrand hills would have looked like through laser. However, this isn't the only city to have existed before colonialism. Molokwane, near Rustenburg, is an even bigger region where Botswana thrived. Here to tell us more are Professors Amanda Esterhuizen and Karim Sadir. A very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Karim, over how long, or the period in which it took to discover this? Perhaps let's just go back a little bit for a bit of context.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. I started this project about 2008, and it started with looking on satellite imagery on Google Earth. And then lots of students looking, and we found out that there were an enormous density of sites, compounds, ruins in that area. And so eventually, 2014, I managed to get some money to have planes fly over there and take these lidar pictures, which then revealed something more complex than I thought. 2015, another mission flew over it, and then I think by about 2016 or 17, the penny dropped, that this was not just a few villages as we were thinking.
Sure. And when we say lidar pictures, what are we talking about?
This is a technology. It's a plane flies over the target area, and they bombard the landscape with pulses of laser light. And essentially these reflect back to the machine, and it measures the exact point where the light intercepted whatever object. And then the technicians can get all this data. It's a massive data. And they can essentially wash out, they can take out all the points that were reflected from trees and grasses and leave only the bare ground.
Sure.
So you can see the foundations of the ruins. The problem was the trees that prevented us from seeing them in the first place. So this technology allowed us to wash the vegetation out of the picture, if you like, and then suddenly there it was.
Without uprooting the trees.
No, the trees are still there.
The trees are safe, great. Amanda, what do we know about Kweneng?
So, I mean, we have known all along that these things existed, and we have known that what we had called mega cities in the past had existed sometime during, probably forming in the 1700s, going into the 1800s. And parts of these places had been excavated, parts of the cities had been reconstructed, but what we hadn't known was the extent of it. And now with lidar, and of course with technologies that can do these wonderful reconstructions so people can start to visualize, what suddenly we're realizing is the complexities of these places and also the extent. I mean, you know, these are sort of urban cities, which then raises a whole lot of other questions as to the extent of the agriculture that was needed to feed this many people. You know, where was the water coming from? It's all the same questions we're asking ourselves now that we, you know, population expansion, how do we survive? How do they control disease? You know, the minute you've got people, animals, all of those kinds of things, diseases become an issue. So it raises a huge amount of questions that actually are quite pertinent to today as well.
Yeah, it's such an exciting time for this continent because in Egypt also, I mean, every other week there's like a discovery and unearthing of antiquities as well. But Karim, when we come back, what do we know about the people that actually, do we know, do we have a level of detail about the people that occupied Kweneng?
Different levels of detail. We know from the architecture, the style of architecture, that they were almost certainly Setswana-speaking Botswana. Which branch of the very great nation of the Botswana is more difficult to say, but the ethnographic and historical work suggests that the Bakwena branch were a large proportion of the people who lived in this area 200 years ago. And then within the Bakwena branch, which sub-branch, that gets into levels of detail that we can't show with the ruins. But again, historians and ethnographers, anthropologists, have recorded that the Bakwena Bapogole were in this area, Bakwena Bakudu were in this area as well. So one can get to that level of detail, I think, but more through history and anthropology than from the ruins. The ruins can't tell us much, except the architectural style is definitely Botswana.
Sure. You alluded to it a little bit earlier on in terms of the cost, that you had to wait it out a little bit before you could actually do this. One would think that, you know, government, everybody would want to throw money behind this because it is a great way to unearth our history, literally.
No, nation building, this is the way for people to realize what a glorious past they had before the colonial era, and it was suppressed and it was hidden, and And government has been very generous. I mean, all the lidar was paid by South African tax money through the National Research Foundation. Now there's a shortage of money, but there's so much data, there's so much information we have to work with.
Interested civilians or interested South Africans, where can they go to support?
They can go and visit, for one thing. Suikerbosrand is open to the public. It's a wonderful place to wander around and visit. They can sponsor a student. The best thing people can do these days is to provide bursaries for students who don't have enough money. African, South African students who are needing the funds to go to university. Well, that's where we have a shortage of African students to study these things. And most of the African students we have come from Botswana and Zimbabwe, who are very clued up on their archaeology, but in South Africa there's a different history. So at the moment I think finances for African, South African students would be the most important thing.
That's a call and a challenge to every single one of us. Amanda, let's talk about Molokwane. Tell us more.
So, I mean, Molokwane is one of these major cities that seems to run along the Magaliesberg. So, also, you know, Bakwena, again, one of these groups that we can sort of touch on and sort of understand. But what we're still trying to understand is what form these large cities. And if you look at the lidar image there, what you see are these little circles and circles and circles, and inside most of those circles there would have been one of the huts that Karim reconstructed in his. And then the larger circles, of course, are where cattle would have been kept and things like that. So we can start then understanding that, look, we're looking at anything between 12 and 20,000 people in one city. What's interesting is the period, because during that period of time, there's also a huge amount of people seemingly coming across up from Natal. And there seems to be a process of incorporation where people are taken in, and which allows for this large city growth. But then when you hit into the 1830s, of course, there's all that warring that seems to go on. There's people coming up from the Cape, there's raiders, there's traders, and then there's a huge drought. And a lot of these cities are completely abandoned, and people move into the Free State towards, and a lot of them are taken in by Mshweshwe, in fact, in Lesotho. So, you know, it's a period of history that, quite frankly, is quite exciting. It's got a little bit of everything, you know, intrigue, movement, warring, and again, as Karim has said, you know, this is something that has to come out in our school curricula, we can now see this, you know, it's visually, it's there, we can get a completely different perspective of the African past. And that, for me, is, I think, why it's such an exciting thing.
Yeah, it's not worth asking why we haven't documented it, because there's different ways of documenting history, right? It could be oral as well, but this is fascinating because then we also get to see it. Moving forward, how do we better take care of this or nurture this in order to unearth more? Because I'm sure there's plenty more. We'll get to a time when we existed once, but we're not there anymore. We're also just images that we see.
These are only two.
And these are only
cities.
two.
I mean, there's Karachweni, which is as big. There's Maratodi, which is just to the southwest of Pilansberg.
Sure.
There's Boitsimkhano, which is another big one. So, yeah, and if we could fly a plane across that entire stretch and capture all of this and then plot all of these out on the landscape,
there'd be many.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Now, I think a very key part of the development would be for government to create some posts for archaeologists, like in the Suikerbosrand Nature Reserve. There are like 800, 900 compounds. It is an ancient city. There's not a single archaeologist on the staff of the people that works there. Somebody needs to work there, catalog this, keep an eye on it. And this applies to all the other national parks. It applies to so many other places. There's no posts. Why is there no posts? Because people think there's nothing interesting to be done with archaeology. It's a colonial endeavor. It doesn't do any good. It's it's just a luxury item. Whereas I'm hoping these discoveries will show that it's an essential part of nation building to know what the past was. And archaeology is the only way to get there. So it wasn't written down. The history at that time wasn't written down. So I think jobs would be a great help. And we're producing the graduates. They need jobs.
Sure, that's also very true. This has awoken something in me, and I'm sure it has for many of our viewers. Thank you very much for the work that you do. It's very important. And the challenge for South Africans to sponsor students to do this work is also has been heard. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Wits University professors Amanda Esterhuizen and Karim Sadir.